And welcome, everyone, to Rock M Radio. This is another brand new episode of Dive Cuts. We're in Season 9. We're still doing this YouTube thing, and if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. It helps us grow, helps people that are looking for this kind of content, helps them find it, makes us searchable, all that kind of stuff. So we appreciate all the comments, likes, and subscriptions that y'all throw our way. As you'll see, I'm alone again. This time we're going to be talking to Rocco Miller. Rocco's a good friend of the podcast. He's been on a few times. If you are familiar with his work, he is at thebracketeer.org. You can also catch him on the Field of 68 college basketball stuff, and as well as Basket Under Review, which is a new website, basically an extension of the Trilly Donovan sphere of college basketball. So definitely make sure you subscribe to all those sites. You can follow him on Twitter and Blue Sky as well. So we're going to go ahead and hop in now and talk to our friend Rocco Miller. And we'd like to welcome back to the show, again, our good friend Rocco Miller, bracketeer.org, expert bracket maker, one of the most leading experts in scheduling and all of men's Division I college basketball. Rocco, welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great, Sam. It's always good to be on with you. And Missouri Tiger Nation, you guys are so passionate. Congrats on the great football start. We were talking about that a little bit before we started. I'm doing well. I just got back from I'm sort of almost back. I'm still in a hotel, but I'll be back tonight from a 12-day trip to everywhere from Seattle to start for football reasons and my mother's birthday, all the way to Atlanta and over to South Carolina, up through the Appalachians, eventually to Maryland and New Jersey last weekend. So it's been a whirlwind. I feel like the season's finally underway. I think I saw 5 Division I practices just last week. So really got the juices flowing, plus a full media day with the SoCon. So yeah, I'm doing well. I'm ready to rumble.
Well, it looks like you made a stop there in Boone, North Carolina as well. You're repping the App State Mountaineers.
I did, yes. Thanks for noticing. Shout out to Dustin Kearns and Bob Shork and the whole Mountaineer staff. First class experience. I had never been to Boone. That place is unbelievable. Have you been there?
I have not. No, I've never been actually to really anywhere in the Carolinas.
Yeah, it was just I was blown away. I was absolutely blown away. The drive in is just amazing. You get up there, it's about 3,500 feet. So to me, it felt like a mini Utah or Colorado experience, but with a college town just right in the heart, of course, of the Boone area, with just a sprawling campus. They were all excited because they had a sold out football game just 2 days. I was there Thursday. They had a sold out football game 2 days later against Oregon State, but for a school that size, to get the Beavers to come cross country, I know that was really a big deal. They won the game as well, I saw later. But yeah, first class experience. It's just such a beautiful place, and I was there on a perfect clear day. They took me up to the top, about as high up as you can get to see the views. If you've never seen that baseball stadium, just Google it. It's got to be the most beautiful, just at least setting in college baseball, let's say. I heard it gets pretty cold there, though, during the actual season. But it was nice to be there on a sunny day.
Yeah, I think a lot of Missouri fans are accustomed, because I know that their baseball stadium kind of sits atop a big hill in Columbia and gets pretty windy. Any town that sits north enough, I guess, starting off in January, February, you can get pretty cold for those practices and early games. Well, let's hop in here because we got a lot to cover. Things are certainly interesting for college basketball. They just announced it. Maybe didn't announce. I think Ross Dellinger reported that the tournament is set to expand. They're looking at next year to kind of target to move to possibly 76 teams. Just quick takeaway on that from you, if you don't mind. I think a lot of people are in general kind of anti-expansion, but I'm at the point where I've always sort of assumed they were going to find a way to expand. Just try to squeeze out as much money as you can from the tournament. And the way to do that is to add more teams. Are they doing this the right way, or are you skeptical that it's going to work out, or we're going to have to watch a lot of 16 and 14 power conference teams, play on Tuesday and Wednesday?
I'm certainly skeptical of that last comment. The 16 and 14 makes me pretty scared, but we had to deal with Texas last year. No offense to the SEC, but that was, to me, an egregious selection for many reasons. And I agree with you as a whole, because once that toothpaste started coming out of the tube, Sam, a couple of years ago, it started coming from very credible sources, that from the networks themselves, that this was being discussed. You just kind of started to figure they were going to figure out a way to get it done. They had to find ways to keep everybody happy. I think one of the major developments that just happened recently, per Ross's report that you referenced, was that the Scores Act support at the mid-major level had 10 different leagues, including, the West Coast Conference and Big West from, where I'm at, all the way out to like the SoCon, who I just visited, and a bunch of, conferences that level across the country. They came together to put some compromises into that Scores Act proposal. Now, whether Congress ends up passing that or not still remains to be seen. But I think some of those agreements, I guess you'll say, and trade-offs helped get the mid-majors a little bit more in line. And I think the model now looks pretty clear to me. Just seeing a few of the different reports and diving in pretty deep. Right before we actually jumped on, I threw a tweet out, so by the time people hear this, they'll probably see it. But the bottom 12 automatic qualifiers would now play what's called an opening round game, as well as the bottom 12 or the last 12 teams selected for at-large bids. So effectively, you're going to be packing, Tuesday and Wednesday in two locations with all those games. And, financially, let's just start with those bottom 12 AQs. One of the points I made on my post was just that you're going to have some really strong teams that have a chance to pull off regular first-round upsets, having to play an earlier round now. Like last year would have included that Robert Morris team that took Alabama to the wire. UNC Wilmington took Texas Tech really, really deep, had a lead at halftime. Wofford was really good in their appearance against Tennessee. And others, they would all have played an opening round game last year, and that's really different and hard for the audience, the general audience, to swallow. I think at the end of the day, what the commissioners and television are telling us is that we're still going to start Thursday morning with 64, regardless of how many games we shove down your throat earlier in the week. Mm-hmm. And you're still going to be just as excited, and they're probably not wrong. I think for the leagues that have to now get used to playing an opening round game every year, if they haven't already, I think most of those leagues have at least had to do it once at certain points, especially when they have an upset champion. Appalachian State themselves, actually, I think one year had to play in the playing game for the Sun Belt. So, that'll just be an annual thing, and they can get their league an extra financial unit. I don't think they're going to compromise on that part of it. So that's the incentive for these, teams that are kind of near the bottom half of D1, who are likely to represent those bottom 12 AQs. I think that's the big story, because I think the common college basketball fan, with the heart of hearts, we all love the first round upsets. I was raised off that. We probably all were. I think that can still happen, but they're going to have turn it into a 2-game winning streak now.
Yeah. And I've long said that, I've never been one of these like staunch oppositionists to expansion, but I wanted expansion to include what I sort of thought were the teams that had earned the right to be there. And by earn the right to be there, I mean teams that had maybe won their conference tournament and got upset along the way. So, like, I would like, if they could come up with a way of just, like, saying, there's, like a Northeast Conference, champion who went undefeated and get upset, in their conference tournament, to just still find a way to include a team like that in the tournament, and because I think that's earning your way to the dance, and I realize that's not how it works. I'm an idealist. I'd like to see more inclusion on the mid to low majors. I'd like to see fewer mediocre high majors, and not even like mediocre, but I mean, like Oklahoma obviously did their work in the non-conference last year, but 6-12 of the SEC, it was a really, really tough league, and they get in over like a lot of really good mid-major teams, and it's just like I'd like to see, especially as the gap widens between the programs that can afford to spend $4 or $5 million in the roster, and pay somebody better to be number 12 or 13 than somebody at a Missouri Valley school, for example, to be the best player on the Valley team. I think as that gulf widens some, it'd be nice to find a way to make sure that those schools are still kind of getting taken care of and have a shot to at least make the tournament more often. Even at the expense of a school like Missouri, like we're going to talk about here, who has spent more time on the bubble, like slightly into the NCAA tournament than they have kind of in that protected seed range, in the last maybe 15 or 20 years. Hopefully Dennis Gates can fix that, but going forward. But like that's kind of my general place on it. I'd like to see the little guys get more shots.
Yeah, I think in general it might benefit that next cut of teams after the Power, and that would be teams from like the American, the A10, and we'll eventually, by the time this even becomes a thing, we'll have 3 really good West Coast leagues. Perhaps you could look at the Pac-12 in basketball as a power conference. That I'm very interested in because they do have 2 really big heavyweights in San Diego State and Gonzaga, plus Boise State, Utah State, Colorado State, and others who have a really good recent track record. That's basically the new and improved Mountain West. So you figure a league like that could get 3 to 5 bids. But I also think like the future Mountain West, which is obviously getting gashed, they still have New Mexico, UNLV, and Grand Canyon for now, who have very invested programs. And then WCC will have Santa Clara and St. Mary's and San Francisco, which they would at least hope to get 2 of those through the door. If you go back and look at last year, which is what I did earlier this morning, it would have been a big benefit for the Atlantic 10. I think there would have been certainly like if they went off of the wins above bubble, which is the way, if you wanted to pick one tool and try to guess how the committee voted, in general, the wins above bubble was the most consistent across the seed list. That would have got, with 4 more teams in this example, that would have got a George Mason in. Debatably, Dayton could have gotten in, and like a San Francisco, and certainly, man, it would have been bad if UC Irvine got left out with that many more spots. But man, I just don't have that much faith in including a Big West, because the Big West is just a cut below those types of leagues. Not that it's anything Irvine did wrong, but Big West didn't have any representation on the selection committee itself. And no matter how many teams they take, those last few spots, Sam, like it's a human exercise. There would have been maybe another committee member that made sure their team got in. It ended up being the cutoff was on North Carolina last year, so Bubba Cunningham got all the attention. But in the future, that could be anybody affiliated with the committee or somebody that maybe serves the interest. So I feel like a bad Nebraska team last year, for example, who won the crown but bad resume, didn't qualify for their conference tournament. They might have thrown them in over like a UC Irvine, and we would have all gone berserk about that. So we'll never have a shortage of things to write about, even in the future.
Well, so looking at how teams get to this tournament, obviously, like as the money is a big influence on how much these leagues have expanded. The quality in the Big Ten, the SEC, the Big 12, the Big East, and in particular the Big Ten and the SEC, as far as being very good, all the way through the league. The SEC record number of teams last year. Right now, I think looking at some of the early kind of, people that are putting out, brackets, which I always love a good bracket, when nobody's played a game yet. But, there as people estimating that the SEC could get as many as 12 teams again. And so it is one of these things where, conferences and a lot of coaches are maybe looking at, well, I don't necessarily have to go out and schedule the toughest because I know I'm going to get, 10, 12, 15 quad win opportunities in league play. And yet, at least there does seem to be a little bit of a turning, at least in kind of the upper echelons of the sport, of coaches and some of the top tier programs being really willing to schedule tough, to get into, Players Era, which is going to be a lot of really high quality teams, schedule home and homes, with really good, teams. Like, who do you think is kind of doing the best as far as, trying to get their program that level of exposure, earlier on in the season?
Yeah, well, I think the fact that Florida, I guess I can start with the national champions, they were willing to start the season against Arizona and Vegas. Yeah. That's a little bit unusual for a defending national champion. Usually you just want to get that first win under your belt, have a big celebration, do the banner. They'll wait for the second game to do that. But then they'll have, Florida State and Miami in the second week, TCU and probably Wisconsin later in November. So during that first month of the season, they'll have 5 pretty good challenges. And then in right away in December, they go to Duke, December 2nd. So obviously that's a heavyweight fight.
And that's part of the SEC ACC challenge, correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So they got hooked up on that in terms of having a really difficult game, but then they did voluntarily go into the Jimmy V to play UConn. And depending on who you ask, and I haven't snapped the chalk yet, and I'm glad that you appreciate a good preseason bracketology. At least if you come to bracketeer.org, I promise you every team selected in there has been through a thorough process, and same with the seeds, which is why it's not out yet, because I try to make sure it's my best foot forward. So I'm going to take a couple more weeks and get it later in October. But they signed up for the Jimmy V Classic. They'll play UConn. And then even in the Orange Bowl Classic, which is later that same week, George Washington spent about $6 million in the portal, per some of my sources. So that's not exactly an easy win. They have a loaded top 7 players at George Washington. Again, Florida should beat them. It's still Florida against GW, but this will be that was definitely by design to test themselves. So you have to start there. I like what they did early. Every year, the answer to your question is Alabama. Nate Oates is the
we've talked about it before, yeah.
Yeah, we've talked. He's the GOAT. He's the GOAT. He does it exactly the way I would do it if I were him. And it's to be fair to everybody else out there, it's hard. Like if you're the coach at LSU or Georgia, for example, those are places where you're worried about your job security until you've proven, you got to get to a few tournaments in a row, like what Chris Jans did at Mississippi State. Unfortunately, at LSU and Georgia, they haven't strung multiple tournament appearances together in a row, which provides you a little bit safer footing for these more aggressive schedules.
Yeah.
But Nate Oates came into year one not given a you-know-what, and and he's scheduled like this at Buffalo. Like we go way back with this, so I'm pretty sure he wanted to play Gonzaga at the Players Era, which is who they're going to play first. He's got Illinois pretty early. He goes to St. John's the first weekend of the season, and he's got Purdue at home right after that. So there's just no matter where you look, like I'm convinced South Florida is definitely the best team in the American on paper. They'll be my pick to win that league. They're going to host them, so it's not just these big spotlight games. They layer it in with like really tough tests. They got Yale coming in. I don't need to tell you about Yale or Auburn fans about Yale. They'll have Clemson in the challenge. So, and they'll play probably another really tough one in Vegas based on how the results go. They have UNLV in game 2, which they've got some talent. It's kind of a road game. They should be okay. But I think at the end of the year, once again, you'll see Alabama towards the top. of, top 5, top 10 in strength of schedule. So I guess those, and I think Auburn, Auburn's getting lots of hype for how hard they scheduled, and I'll give them credit. Like, their top end games are very, very good. Having Purdue, towards Christmas time at Indianapolis, having Houston, of course, in Birmingham, a de facto home game. That'll be a big opportunity for Stephen Pearl in kind of his first 2 weeks. They've got 3 tune-up games before Houston comes to Birmingham. They got the road game to Arizona in December, and they're also in the Players era with Oregon and Michigan as known opponents. And NC State's in their challenge at home, which maybe I'm a little too assumptive about Auburn, because I do think they probably have over the last couple of years, maybe last 5 years, the best home court advantage in the country. Mm-hmm. I just almost pencil in a W for anybody they play at home. I know Florida went in there and beat them last year, but I think that was their only home loss. And so, yeah, I think Auburn deserves some credit for doing that, but they did layer in some games in the right spots to get right if they fall in some of those big ones.
Well, and one thing that I want to kind of bring up here, because I think it's interesting, and that's Kentucky.
Yep.
Because so far we've talked about teams that have been kind of expected to be top, contend for at least a top 4 finish in the league. I think that's been the expectation at all of those programs: Alabama, Florida, Auburn. Without a doubt, you have to include Kentucky. Kentucky is, the biggest blue blood in the league. Right. And yet they have some limitations on, some of their non-conference scheduling that I think maybe a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of. And that, there's, a certain number of home games that they just have to schedule because of whatever ticketing setup they have and having to kind of get the home crowd in. And so it almost I've seen some Wildcat fans kind of complaining and a lot of Kentucky reporters just sort of shrugging, like, this is the reality of being at Kentucky, is we have to have the home gate, and yet their schedule is it's never easy because they've always got the what's the one that
CBS Sports,
the CBS Sports, they're in
the
that
Champions Classic,
yeah, and then they get North Carolina in the although that is a home game, but I mean, it is quite a bit of Q3, Q4 games at home, and I think that's sort of it's going away from kind of where everybody else is swimming, at least at the top of the league.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a revenue component to the home gate that ties back into the player pool dollars, and maybe I'm a little off with that, but I know it's vital enough to the point where, from an MTE standpoint, they haven't really played in a big one in a long time. They've hosted the Wildcat Classic, or I think that's the right name, or just their home event that gets them 3 home games. So that's how they open the season, with Nichols, Valpo, Eastern Illinois. Really no tests in there. Actually, you could argue any of those 3 could finish last in their league, just if the Southland, the Valley, and the OVC. All of those teams are down. So not only are they scheduling the home games where they need them, but they are kind of hand-picking some very bad ones to and with Mark Pope's system, I mean, that's a great way to raise your floor in the net. And at this point, I know we all laugh about it, but it actually makes a difference in seeding. So it could be, who knows, could be the difference in any given year between a 3 and a 5 seed. We just don't know it going in. So why not schedule them? The Iowa States of the world, of course, taught us that years back. And they've got a bunch of more like that. Like NC Central, I know, is very down. Tennessee Tech's coach is not in good standing. They could easily be really down. Bellarmine's been down. They have a brand new coach. So yeah, they've peppered in a bunch of very predictable games where they can play 12 to 14 guys if they want to. But let's talk about the high end of the schedule. Going to Louisville, obviously, is a huge opportunity on paper. Michigan State in the Champions Classic doesn't hurt in the Garden. Gonzaga plays them in Nashville, part of that 6-year deal. So they knew that was built in. And now they get St. John's in the CBS Sports deal. They're the replacement because Mick Cronin and UCLA did not want to travel east any longer based on their Big Ten commitment. So out of those four are away from home. You get a decent amount of data. I'm sure they can go 2-2 in those four. I'm not sure which two you think they'll win, but that seems logical. If things go right, they can go 3-1 or 4-0. And then you would expect them to be able to figure out how to beat North Carolina and Indiana in Rupp Arena. Indiana, of course, just hiring DeVries. Should have a nice team, but probably not in a position to go into Rupp and win. That would be a big upset, I would say. And same if North Carolina is able to go in there and win as well, who's probably closer to like a top 25, top 20 team. But this Kentucky team on paper is stacked. I really like the team, actually. I think they have a chance to be a 1 seed if it all breaks right. So yeah, to your point, Sam, like that's where it's frustrating, because if you have teams that are in the running for a 1 seed going into the season playing that many soft home games, it's pretty frustrating.
Well, so speaking of soft home games, the Missouri seems to kind of be similar to some of the teams that are projected in the bottom of the league, and the Tigers right now, by all the analytics, I think are kind of thought to be, right about between 6th and 8th, depending on your service. I think preseason we've got them at 6. That's human stuff, kind of looking at maybe bringing some more people back, but like Dennis Gates. He likes his, we call it the lab, and the lab is basically the month of November. He's going to line up a bunch of, Q4 games, and he's going to experiment with lineups. We're going to bring in Southeast Missouri. We're going to bring in VMI. We're going to bring in Prairie View A&M and South Dakota, South Carolina State and Cleveland State. And it's just like, I'm just wondering at what point, are we going to see like Missouri play more valuable games in the month of November? Or maybe if this is just Dennis Gates and what he's going to do kind of moving forward. I mean, like we know, and hopefully this is like it's not scheduled forever, but hopefully they do end up scheduling it forever in Kansas. They do have Illinois. Those 2 games kind of being guaranteed in December. Are good. But there's like not a lot of other meat on the bone there. Even they pulled an away game at Notre Dame in the ACC SEC challenge. Notre Dame should be better than they've been, but still probably a game that Missouri is, if who they think they're going to be, should go in there and win. What do we got to do to convince? And it was reported they had a contract with Players Era for next year, and they've backed out of it. So I don't know what it's going to take to kind of get our team into a more competitive schedule in the month of November.
Well, I guess the first answer I would have to the overall challenge of that is the 0-18 season of a couple years ago. I think that left some scars, and I think at this point, it's always just a risk adverse exercise for, it starts with Gates, it's his program, but then giving the scheduling to one of the assistants and giving marching orders, it's like make sure that we're in position to never have that happen again, or that we're in position if it does happen again and it's a ridiculously hard SEC, that we at least have 11 other wins to show for ourselves. So I think that might have messed with some of the thinking long term. Of course, never wanting to go through that again, but I do think you're onto it. Like with Kansas and Illinois being basically set for December for the immediate time being, hopefully long term. Certainly long-term with Illinois. And then, of course, the SEC ACC challenge, they knew before their opponent that it was going to be that date of December 2nd. So they've got 3 good ones in December kind of already guaranteed. I would still like to see them play in a hard event. Like the Players Era would have made sense. You could still layer in your lab games, as you say, if you stay in the Players Era. Maybe they'll circle back to that. I'll get to the bottom of that. I didn't really understand what happened there. I just assumed they were in. So that's a little surprising. But I do think, if this formula got them a 6 seed last year and, it worked, a couple years before that, there's really not a big motivation, I don't think, for him to change it.
Yeah.
I am interested by some of the teams they did give guarantees to, at least these first two. Both SEMO and VMI are, they're not Missouri, of course, but they're pretty interesting on paper. I think SEMO is my OVC champion.
I like what Brad Korn's done down in Cape. He's done a nice job down there.
That's a cool game for the state, no doubt. And then VMI, who I was just with at the SoCon Media Day, Ricky Bradley's the preseason SoCon Player of the Year. It's smart, actually, for Missouri to schedule them because as a military academy, even though they have like one of the best teams they've probably had in 20 years, they're very limited in terms of like pure sheer athleticism. Bradley could transfer up. I don't even know if he could transfer up to the SEC, and they're by far their best player. The other guys are just really solid SoCon level players, but they're still limited in terms of their footwork and overall athleticism and the things that really move the needle in the power league. So VMI is going to win a lot of close games in their league because they're tough as hell. So obviously don't let them hang around, but that win could age pretty well for Missouri later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I think there's also, I've actually kind of documented in some of the preseason coverage about, the connections to the staff. And there's a former Mizzou staffer on VMI's staff as coach.
We got Cleveland State, too.
Well, yeah, and Rob Summers is taking over at Cleveland State, and so there's a familiarity there. I think that he's always made an effort to do what he can to kind of support other black head coaches. And so you see a lot of, teams that are coming in, from outside either have a connection to the staff or, it's a black head coach. Obviously all admirable reasons, but especially during that Thanksgiving week where there's nobody on campus, it would be nice to say go somewhere else and please play somebody that we can watch on TV that's worth tuning in for, as opposed to I think last year it was Lindenwood. Right.
Yeah, no, I think there'll be more. The good news, I guess, potentially is there'll be more options in the future. Whether Missouri wants to take advantage of them or not remains to be seen. But the MTE rules are basically going away starting next season. It's just going to be 32 non-conference games. Get them however you want. So what I'm working with event companies and organizers to create is, I guess, a good example is, the Players Era format is what we're trying to build for all levels, because once you create more of a basketball festival type of idea versus the rigidness of MTE rules, which means you have to play a certain amount of days. You have if it's a 2-game, it's a 2-game. It's a 3-game, it's a 3-game, and you have to play them to get to 31. All that goes away, so you can just create, different locations across wherever the islands, Florida, Arizona, California, wherever people want to go during that week, and just play festivals. And that means, Mizzou could go down to, like what Marquette did last year. I think it was Marquette went down to the Bahamas, and they just played one game. And you can do that kind of thing. Georgia and St. John's did that. So you can also go down and play 3 games. So it just depends. Obviously, at a place like Missouri, getting X amount of home games is probably part of the requirement. And that's why they keep hosting these 2-game events at home. But the opportunities and the options are going to be way expanded now, and you get an extra game starting next year.
Well, so since we've talked about Missouri and haven't really touched on anybody towards kind of the bottom of the at least the projections of the bottom of the conference, I feel like it is preseason. We'll talk about if we're using Torvik, or for people that are paying attention to my own previews that are coming forth, I can actually give you the rankings here. So we'll just do this real quick. So I've averaged Torvik, Mia, Haslam, weighted them a little bit. We've got Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, top 4. Auburn, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, Missouri. Next, Texas, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Georgia, Texas A&M, Ole Miss coming in 14th, which is a little bit surprising. A Chris Beard-led team. LSU and South Carolina. So kind of looking at the bottom of the conference, like Chris Jans is always really smart as far as his scheduling to make sure that they have games that are going to, look good come, tournament selection time without really going out and scheduling, a meat grinder of a schedule. But who of those teams kind of stands out as doing a good job of setting themselves up if they can maybe exceed some expectations, once conference play comes around?
Yeah, I think out of that group, Mississippi State's probably the best, just based on the fact I think they have manageable games, but they're playing at least they're playing 6 of them away from Starkville, and then the games in Starkville, they have SMU and Memphis, which are no slouches. Like SMU, you could argue, is right in that, we call it the Enfield zone, where it seems like forever USC was stuck in the 40s. If SMU's in the 40s, that's a really good game for Mississippi State at home. Yeah. Memphis, of course, is down on paper, but we all know that Penny's teams over the years, they play up in those games, so that will be a tough test. And then there are 6 games that are not in Starkville. Going to Georgia Tech, not overwhelming. In fact, Mississippi State probably expects to win that game. That's their challenge matchup. The San Francisco game in Tupelo, very interesting. I think San Francisco's got a nice roster. I saw them practice, but good on Jans for making that happen. And by the way, it's still in Mississippi, so counts as a neutral, and they'll have all the advantages being closer to home. Mm-hmm. In Kansas City, that tournament was committed to years ago, and it kind of broke well for the Bulldogs. And so this is another one where they're advantaged a little bit. Kansas State is going to be heavily dependent on PJ Haggerty, and they have some other nice pieces. We don't know if the pieces fit. That might take a month or two for the Wildcats to figure out. So despite it looking like a road game, Mississippi State's got to be the favorite going in. And then Nebraska or New Mexico. Nebraska is kind of stuck in that bubble range themselves. Obviously, they'll have Big Red close by in Kansas City, but I still think Mississippi State's the better team on paper. And New Mexico's starting fresh with Eric Olin. A bright future there, but not nearly the Jimmies and the Joes that he'll eventually have there. So Mississippi State's got a really good chance to win that whole event. And then Utah, of course, with Alex Jensen taking over, even though it's in Salt Lake City, again, going to be a tough environment. But Utah just lost one of their projected starters for the season, the Western Kentucky transfer, and they're a little bit limited depth-wise to begin with. So I could see Mississippi State winning 5 of those 6. They'll be underdogs, I think, in the game of the Pentagon early, Iowa State, but that will make them tougher. So I think Jans and his staff did a brilliant job, because very easy to see them going 12-1. And if they do that, there's a lot of quality wins in there that will age well, and they'll be in a situation where they can go a couple games below 500, as sad as it sounds, and they'll be safely in.
Well, he's done that every year so far, which is
why wouldn't it happen again?
Yeah, it's been a parade of 8 and 10s, which
gets the job done.
Ironically, it's what I've got them picked. I actually just finished their preview last night. To publish here in a couple weeks, but and Torvik has them projected to go 8 and 10. So I love it. I really root for that now. I want Mississippi State to be good quality, and I want them to go 8 and 10.
Yep.
So
I think also in that group, Sam, I'll just finish with that group. I'll go a little faster with Ole Miss. It's similar. It's similar in some ways. It's not similar when you look at the actual opponents. So they do have 6 games scheduled away from Oxford, which I in general appreciate. But 2 of them, they have a Tupelo game with Alabama A&M, which is like a bye game in Tupelo, and then they have the Mississippi Coast Classic with Southern Miss, which ended up being a pretty good game last year. I think they pulled away and won by about 11. Yeah. But this year Southern Miss is really, really bad. They could be 300s. So that's basically a bye game as well. So they really have 4 tests away from home. But 3 of them, Iowa, St. John's, and NC State, those are going to be very difficult games, if not losses on paper. And then, of course, getting Miami and Memphis at home, those will at least be tests. So, it was a kind of a roundabout way to kind of settle the score with Mississippi State, but you could say Ole Miss is actually in a harder spot. And so I respect that. And then with Texas, I think you mentioned them in that group. They go to the Maui Invitational, which will be interesting because they have the easy side of the bracket. Arizona State's pretty down. A lot of people have them towards the bottom, if not at the bottom of the Big 12. Then they get Washington State or Chaminade. I mean, it's the weakest Maui ever. So Texas almost has, at least on paper, a bye to the championship game.
Yeah.
And that's where they could play NC State. I think for the SEC, that's the best case scenario. Get a good championship game, but they could lose that and they'll be fine. They also get road UConn, Duke in the opener in Charlotte. I think I'm actually going to be at that game, and a home game with Virginia. So the thing is, with Texas, they could win just 2 of those Maui games that they're supposed to win, maybe one of the other ones, and they're going to be in okay position. And then I think the other ones I think were a little below average. So in the below average group, that's where I agree with you. We talked about before we came on, South Carolina clearly the weakest of the bunch, with effectively only Clemson on the road, who, again, Clemson will not be projected to be what they've been the last couple of years. I'm having a hard time putting them into the field. They're stuck on my bubble right now. And then Butler, clearly not a tournament team. They get in their MTE, and Northwestern, possibly not a tournament team. Those are their only 3 games away from home, with just Virginia Tech as a home game from the power level. So South Carolina's got a ton of time to figure out what they're going to be before they even have to stand on the SEC stage.
And Virginia Tech is also in a similar position as South Carolina and LSU in that, they instead of paying the buyout to fire the coach, they gave, some money into NIL to try to improve the roster. And I don't think many people are convinced.
Right. They gave a lot of money to some mid-major All-Americans, mid-major All-Conference players. I'm looking at, here on my website, I'm looking at Markel Sutton, who very nice player at the Summit League level. Mm-hmm. But can you defend is really the question in the SEC. Summit League, infamous for never playing any defense. So, and LSU, I think, had one of the weaker defenses, if not the worst defense in the league last year. So that'll be the big question I have about them as a basketball team. But the schedule, outside of the Texas Tech game, which is obviously a loss on paper, that's in Fort Worth, where it's always Texas Tech overwhelms that arena with their fans. So good on them for playing that game to just kind of learn how it feels to play a top team. A tough one with that SMU, but it's in New Orleans. They could easily win that. Their MTE is pretty light with Drake, DePaul, and Georgia Tech. They actually should win that. And then a road game with Boston College in the Challenge didn't do them any favors either. So LSU will have a long time to figure out what they are as well.
Yeah, the whole setup at the bottom of the league, is especially because I think most projections at this point have South Carolina at the bottom and LSU, just ahead of them.
Second 15. To the bottom.
Yeah. Yep. It's going to be tough for those guys to kind of dig out of, what a lot of people are kind of deeming like maybe time to contact your realtor for some coaching staffs down there. But
true.
At this point, I will kind of giving everybody like a rating on how they did and setting up their non-conference. You kind of gave me your rundown before we came on, but let's talk about you had different categories. Who came out in your bottom group?
Yeah, so bottom group starts with Missouri. We covered it. Obviously, they have the 2 big ones with Kansas and Illinois.
Yeah.
But with just the abundance of home guarantee games, and compared to where they're projected to land, you would just and you agree with this, like you would have liked to see them take on another big one or two. Now we're dealing with a league here that got 14 of the 16 in last year, so there was probably zero motivation for some of these teams to beef up their schedule compared to last year. So, with LSU and South Carolina, that was kind of expected. So they're in that group. We didn't touch on Georgia, but Georgia, they've gone fairly light themselves. In fact, pretty light. Xavier has a new coach. That's who they open with in the Charleston Classic. This is the watered-down Charleston Classic with just 4 teams. And then we've already talked about Clemson being somewhere near the bubble. Well, West Virginia, they're all brand new. They would love to be near the bubble themselves. So Georgia on paper should be the best team in the Charleston Classic. So they're not really getting anything above their belt in that event. Cincinnati in Atlanta, that would also be a game where Georgia's expected to win. And nothing at home. I mean, the games they got at home are really the bottom of D1. Outside of, I will say, December 29th, watch out because LIU's coming. And I saw that team practice. They've got some real dudes. But outside of that, I mean, Georgia Tech, of course, the local rivalry game, not doing them any favors. Georgia Tech's pretty down there still this year, so Georgia's in that group. And then lastly, Texas A&M, and this is an interesting one because they got started so late under Bucky compared to the rest of the league. You almost give them a little bit of a pass, and they kept adding guys in the portal late. That now I think they're actually going to be pretty good. They could land like a top 6 seed if it all breaks right. He plays such a crazy style. If that works with more elite athletes, they'll be able to prove themselves in league play. But I think the actual schedule itself is very manageable. They are going on the road a couple times, but they should have the edge against Oklahoma State and Pittsburgh in those 2 road games. Florida State and Tampa, even though it's in Florida State's backyard, Texas A&M certainly got a better roster. And then SMU, I would still give A&M the edge there in Arlington. Everything else is basically a home bye game. They do get UCF at home as part of that, but UCF towards the bottom of the Big 12 as well. So Texas A&M, if they're as good as I think they can be, they might be undefeated still.
Yeah.
So if you're in one of those pools where they give you, you need a random team to pick who's going to be the last team undefeated, you might want to look into the Aggies.
Well, so who met their expectations as far as like what you think is not a great schedule, but quality did well enough to not get scorn or ridicule?
Yeah, so we covered Kentucky, Mississippi State, and I touched on Texas. So I have all 4 of those in that group. I would also add Vanderbilt and Arkansas. So with Vanderbilt, the one place I give them credit is they are going to play 3 true road games. That's very rare. That's the most in the SEC. So I'm giving them a boost because of that. But at the same time, I don't think any of those are tournament level teams entering the season. So if they just can handle their business, they should win at least 2 of the 3.
Yeah, it's not murderer's row, but going on the road, at any point against
it has challenges. Yeah, it's got its challenges for sure. And then the battle for Atlantis, I think it looks watered down, and it is compared to any other year. And they'll have not an easy win, but it certainly should be a win against Western Kentucky to open. But that second game, they'll get a really good test. Either VCU, who many think has the most talent in the A10, or South Florida, who I certainly think is the best team in the American. So that'll be interesting. Their second day game, and then on the third day they could get a Virginia Tech or even a St. Mary's. That would be a rematch, of course, of the first round NCAA tournament game last year. So you would, if you're a Vanderbilt and an SEC fan, you would hope for that on day 4. And outside of that, they get SMU on a home floor for their challenge game. So I'm okay. I think they met expectations, especially since Vanderbilt was somewhat close to the bubble last year. And I would say with Arkansas, they love their team. I've talked to them multiple times throughout the summer. But they can blind you with some of the big games. They get Duke, Texas Tech, and Houston. Obviously, those are going to be phenomenal tests and big spotlight games. Of course, playing Duke on Thanksgiving in Chicago. But and then going to the road at Michigan State. That's another jumps right off the page, right out of the gate on opening weekend. But the home games, I think, they went pretty light. James Madison, that's a top 30 team in my mid-major poll. That should be interesting, I guess, for a little bit. Louisville at home will be great, but again, that was assigned to them. It's not like they went out and scheduled it themselves.
Right.
And I think the rest is but rest of the teams are not going to test them. Samford's got a great program. But they have a new coach in Lenny Acuff. So So I give Arkansas just to meet expectations. Again, mainly for going to the very top of the sport and getting 4 of those games, but the rest could have been better with more depth to the schedule. 2 teams that Sam I'll mention in this group, I actually have them a little bit below average, and that would be Oklahoma. I thought Oklahoma, the 7 home games, I don't think any of them will test them. I give them a little bit of credit for going to Gonzaga and starting that series. That's obviously a loss on paper, so give them kudos there. They do have to go to Wake as well for the challenge, but I think Arizona State and Phoenix. Maybe I'm being a little harsh because Arizona State's down. That is still a road game, but they got to find a way to win that.
Yeah,
and then
you got to win that.
And they should be a lot better than Oklahoma State in their local rivalry game. They get to play that in Oklahoma City. The Marquette game should be good. Maybe I should have given them a little more credit there. Nebraska in South Dakota, again, decent game. But I guess I'm just a little disgusted about the 7 home games that will not test them at all.
Yeah.
And then the other team in that group is Tennessee, if you can believe that. I respect the Barnes program, and I know they're in the Players era, and we don't know who their third opponent is. But I think getting Rutgers in the Players era didn't help at all. No. Rutgers probably picked 16th or 17th out of 18 Big Ten teams. Houston will be an incredible matchup on day 2 there. Illinois is a good matchup. So they got 2 really awesome games. But outside of that, you could poke holes in everything else. Going to Syracuse. Obviously, hosting Louisville should be good, so we'll give them credit for that too. But the other bye games at home are pretty lackluster.
Yeah. But yeah, and I think there's been a little more turnover on that roster than maybe Barnes is used to, and that might be playing a role in him pulling the Dennis Gates soft entry into conference play. So before we get out of here, let's go ahead and crown a champion. Who's got the best non-conference schedule? Who wins the Rocco Miller Award for best non-conference schedule in the SEC?
Yeah, I'm doing one last check here, but I'll stick with the annual Nate Oates Award. He's got to keep his title.
We're gonna have to just dub it the Nate Oates Award for best.
Yeah, until he leaves the league, it's gonna be really hard to beat this guy, because the difference for me is I look at the whole non-conference schedule, not just your top 5 or 6 games.
Yeah.
And so the depth and quality 1 through 13. I mean, the only game that you could poke a hole in is North Dakota. Of course, they did that series for Grant Nelson last year. They actually went to North Dakota and played that game. Mm-hmm. And so now they had to, get the home game out of it. But outside of that, that's their only quad 4 game on paper. UTSA could be quad 4. We'll have to see how good the Roadrunners are. I'm a little higher on them than most. I think they can, with some of the upside portal additions the Roadrunners made, they could finish top half of the American. And then, South Florida, Yale, Purdue, Clemson, those are their other home games. And then Kennesaw is in my top 25 for mid-major. So playing them on a neutral should be at least quad 3 and with some quad 2 upside. So it has to be Nate Oates.
I've got Kennesaw State listed at 129 in the average analytics ranking, so
that's a safe quad 3.
Yeah. That's a safe quad 3. Yeah, I mean, really, for anybody that wants to look at these schedules, you can actually click on every team and Bart Torvik and just sort of look at, those are Torvik's rankings. As teams, play games, they'll get adjusted. But yeah, I mean, Alabama's open with North Dakota, and then you get number 7 St. John's, number 4 Purdue, number 8 Illinois, number 24 Gonzaga, and then a break with number 78 UNLV. That's good scheduling. I respect Nate for being willing to take losses. I think more coaches need to be willing, and maybe as the tournament expands, maybe that'll be like a nice little sidebar. Is coaches will get a little more relaxed and be willing to kind of take a couple extra L's in the non-conference slate. Rocco, we always appreciate your hopping on and explaining all this stuff to our listeners. Go ahead and plug your stuff. Tell everybody where they can find your information and where they can read your stuff.
Well, you just gave me a free plug opportunity as well. Over on bracketeer.org, the site that I own and operate, one thing we do throughout the off season, and thanks to the people behind the scenes that help with this, I certainly run out of time. We have non-conference schedule pages for the top 10 leagues. So obviously the SEC was the first page available earlier in the spring. So if you want a one page that you can look at every non-conference schedule in the SEC, just go to bracketeer.org and scroll down to the SEC. And that's basically the foundation throughout the season in terms of anything bracket forecasting, bracketology related. All of my forecasts will be there. We'll also have a couple new young up-and-coming writers on there, so hopefully you enjoy their work. Robbie LaStella out of Florida helped cover the NCAA tournament, and we'll have a new announcement for another guy soon. We'll wait on that one. The rest of my work, Field of 68, I'm on 2 different shows this coming season. We've already launched the mid-major show, so if you like that level of basketball, it basically covers the other 22 conferences. Once you go past the traditional multi-bid leagues of the American and the A10 and WCC, beyond that, so basically starting with the Missouri Valley, Conference USA, and below. We cover all 22 leagues. We'll have another episode coming up Thursday night, 5 Eastern, to go over our mid-major All-America teams. But once the season starts, really excited. It'll be every Thursday, 5 Eastern, recapping and previewing with special guests. And we have the live production this year from the same guys who do Field of 68's After Dark show that many of you are probably familiar with. And then also, of course, later in the season, don't forget we have Fielding the 68, where I'm the lead bracketologist on there. That will be Mondays and Fridays as usual once we get to that part of the year. Last but not least, I'm part of Trilly Donovan's new platform called Basket Under Review, mainly focused on mid-major bracketology and any kind of special interest stories that I can find, which is kind of a cool platform where I can do different writing and interviews. I interviewed every SoCon head coach on there last week. I don't know what's coming next. I think I'm doing a podcast with Em and Brennan next week. So just check back there. Even if it's not my work, the talent on there is really, really superb. We've got like the 3-man weave, Kevin Sweeney, Em and Brennan, Jordan Majeski, several others, Brian Ralph, just doing amazing, amazing work on all levels of college basketball, a lot of analysis and interviews. So
yeah, Will Warren
feel
is
free
doing
to
that too.
And Will Warren, I didn't mean to leave you out, Will. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Well, no, he loves the Vols.
Yes. I just brought that because a lot of SEC fans will probably be familiar with Will's work. He's expanded his scope the last few years to move away from just talking about the Vols, and now he talks about a lot of teams. But Will does great work as well.
Yeah, he does. They've got a podcast on there just to plug those guys. Him and Jim Root called Stats. It's
Jim
really,
Root's
really
Mizzou guy.
Yes, he is. We love you, Jim. But yeah, so their stats podcast is super fascinating because they are diving into every Ken Pom stat you can imagine. I know they did a few episodes on who's going to have the top 10 offenses in college basketball this year and why, and just got so into the weeds. And they did that for defenses, and they're coming up with a different theme every week. I don't know how they have time to do all the research, but it's very impressive. So definitely check that out as well. And appreciate all the support. Like, I love talking to all the Mizzou people, especially you, Sam, throughout the year. You guys are clearly very passionate, and we share that.
Well, thanks for coming on, Rocco, and we'll have to bring you back on. I think we did a bracketology special last year. We'll have to do that again. That was a good discussion.
Would love that.
Yeah, thanks for hopping on, and we'll see you on the rest of the interwebs. Goodbye.
Thank you.
And once again, thank you to Rocco Miller for joining our podcast. Last time you're going to see me for a little bit. I think coming up we have an episode next week with the Mats. Hopefully they'll have some time to kind of get in and talk about the Mizzou roster, as well as maybe some 2026 prospects that have and have not committed. I think we haven't actually recorded since Aiden Chronister committed. So hopefully those guys can kind of get into that stuff. And then I'll be back in a couple weeks with a special interview with Mizzou basketball coach Ryan Sharbaugh. We'll talk about the roster, and then another week after that we'll be in our season preview. Like, season is just weeks away. So yeah, thanks for everybody for watching. Make sure like, subscribe, comment, let us know how we're doing. We appreciate everything. Thanks everybody, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you everyone for tuning in to Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. Rock M Radio is the official podcast network of Rock M Plus, a new and exciting subscription service provided by me and the other voices of Rock M Radio. Please take a few moments to head over to rockm.plus and sign up for an account today. The cost is only $5 a month, and benefits include access to our live podcast, a subscriber-only message board, weekly newsletters, and more. If you enjoyed this episode of Rock M Radio and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, make sure to click the subscribe button below and tell your friends. Our podcast feed is available through the Apple Podcast app for iPhone, Google Podcast app for Android, whatever app you listen to your podcast. You can also find Rock M Radio on Spotify. If you're looking for a podcast about your favorite team that is not the Missouri Tigers, Fan First Sports Network is your answer. A full podcast network loaded with the team-specific podcasts covering Major League Baseball, the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLS, and more. And we'll be back with more episodes of Rock M Radio coming to you soon.